Okay, so 250 kilometres as an ultramarathon at the end of March, starting from the office and finishing at the bottom of Ben Nevis. Key detail being the bottom. I will be elated at the top, hopefully, and very disappointed on the way down. The irony of me filming this in a studio down in London is not lost on me, given that we have a studio up in Edinburgh that we use, but we did have a guest, unfortunately, have to change plans last minute, which means that this slot was available and paid for. So here I am, recording solo, answering your questions, which I have right here. So let's kick off with a question from Dickie Greenleaf. There's actually a few from him. So, how will you avoid blisters? This might upset a few people, and I am sorry, but I have never, ever, in any ultra-endurance events, struggled with blisters. If they develop, I'll get some Compeed on them quickly. I have managed to have quite wet feet in the past and never really developed them. Whether that's genetic, whether it's the fact that I wear open toe box shoes, whether it's the fact I found socks that I really get on with, I'm not quite sure. But in terms of blisters, it's actually not as much of a concern for me with this event as it might be for somebody else from an ultra-endurance point of view. But that's low on the priority list of concerns, if I'm being entirely honest. So that's probably a fortunate lottery that I've drawn there. But again, it could be down to socks, open toe box shoes, resilient feet. I don't know. But blisters are not as much of a concern as they might be for others. So I hope that doesn't disappoint you, Dickie, given that you might have been looking for some insights that you could practice yourself. But alas. Question from Morgan L_fit. Is food quality paramount, or is it just get the calories in during training and the event? So training, food quality is paramount, as is all training and sort of my life in general. I try and focus on macronutrients, calorie intake first and foremost. I also make sure that micronutrients are focused on as well and that they're quite dense in consumption. But the bottom line is, during the event, it is a case of getting in whatever I can as often and frequently as I can, because if I focus on getting high micronutrient quality food, then there's probably going to be a lot of fiber that comes with that, which could wreak havoc on my toilet considerations. And palate fatigue, flavor fatigue is going to set in, and what I want to be able to make sure that I'm doing is fueling the tank. And if I focus too much on foods that are not as enjoyable, then it might become more and more difficult progressively for me over time to actually get food in. So that's going to be paramount. Everything I'm doing is trying to make sure that I'm cumulatively and sustainably able to get fluids, sodium, and food on board. So realistically, it's going to be a case of get the calories in during the event. I'm not going to be moving so quickly that I can't eat solid or bigger meals and things like that. I mean, training runs recently, I've been doing exactly that to prepare for this. I got a double 99 flake, which is about £3 these days, inflation, and ate that whilst I was running. I had a cheese toastie and a latte midway through a training run very recently. So yeah, get the calories in is paramount during the event, but that doesn't mean that my training nutrition is just YOLO it and see what happens. Food quality is very important currently, but come event day, that's just going to be a case of getting the calories in. Josh Skersey, will you be testing your total around the time to do the run to see how much strength you have kept? Yes, that is going to be the week beforehand. I've been doing a lot of sort of 85 to 95% work recently, because that's what I always found is most effective for me holding on to strength whilst really ramping up endurance volume. I'll probably test the lifts separately. I might do squat and deadlift on the same day. But as it stands in training, the only thing that's taken a bit of a hit, as is always the case, just because of the volume focus and the slight loss in specific training, is upper body work. So my bench press has taken a little bit of a hit, but as it stands, my squat and deadlift are still feeling fairly solid. I pulled 500 pounds under a fair amount of fatigue yesterday for a set of 2, and it was pretty reasonable. Positioning was a little bit off due to stiffness from a big day out in the mountains, but all in all, feeling pretty solid. I front squatted 160 kilos earlier in the week. So yeah, everything's feeling good as it stands, but we will see come testing ahead of time. Not too much emphasis being placed on that, because at the end of the day, the training I'm doing at the moment is to focus on retaining my strength work or incrementally increase it from a deadlift and a squat point of view. That is essentially the nature of hybrid training in many ways. So what I am looking to do is to get a feel for where my strength is, but acknowledge that I'm going to be under a lot of fatigue from the spike in endurance volume. So therefore, it's not a true representation of my strength within that context, if that makes sense. So I'm going to chuck some heavy weight about as I'm tapering in to the 250k itself. So yeah, in short, I guess. Question from Ben on Therox. Ben on the rocks, actually, I can imagine that is. How can you eat enough to maintain volume but also drop weight required to move fast? I'm not aiming to drop weight at all. Over 250 kilometers, me going into a big calorie deficit to try and get lighter in this training period is not going to be very effective. What that's going to do is just compromise my training by not allowing me to recover effectively. I'm going to feel groggy. I'm going to feel cognitively drained. So what I'm doing is basically eating at maintenance currently, sometimes eating in a bit of a surplus just to facilitate recovery and adaptation to the training I'm doing. But yeah, for something like this, if you're going to try and drop weight, it needs to be over a very, very long period of time so you can get used to that. If you're trying to sort of plummet your weight down for the sake of being a little bit quicker, your body's not going to be able to adapt to that reduced weight. It doesn't just immediately translate to speed because you've got to adjust biomechanically, you've got to adjust aerobically and physiologically. So yeah, I'm not focusing on trying to drop weight for this. I'm focusing on effective training, and that's kind of a general recommendation for everybody, unless it's being done sustainably over a long period of time, because you can be in a small deficit and still make performance gains. But if you're going into a large deficit to try and rush weight loss for the sake of running speed, you're actually probably better just working on adapting to being quicker. So yes, that is my main consideration. And ultimately, the body weight that I'm carrying, I'll mitigate a lot of that, as a lot of ultra endurance strategy often entails, by walking the uphills and running the flats and the downhills. Question from Patrick_Tatum. How do you keep the internal dialogue positive? Well, I would be lying to you if I said that I always did. There's going to be ebbs and flows. I often use a psychological method that a friend of mine called Doug, who is currently doing a PhD in sports psychology, taught me, and Johnny on Project Vertical in 2020, which is the ABC method, I think it's called, but essentially using ABC as a frame of reference. A, you're feeling fantastic, on top of the world, everything's great. B, you're sort of steady and cruising. C, you're in an absolute hole and you're having a terrible time. And what we need to acknowledge is that you will ebb and flow between those. It's a bit of a sort of seesaw or a pendulum as time goes on. So you'll spend most of the time at the B, just cracking on. You'll spend a lot of time in C, and you'll spend a lot of time in A. And what you need to acknowledge is that when you're in the C, no one feeling lasts forever. When you're in the B, try and get used to it and just keep moving forwards. When you're in the A, don't get into a false sense of security and think that you're now over the hump, because you will probably drop back down at some point. So the more experience and the more times I've had the opportunity to expose myself to that feeling over time gives me more and more confidence that I can deal with the pendulum swings as they come. And ultimately, as long as I rely on dark humour and support from those around me and the support crew, whilst really holding myself accountable to the fact that no one feeling lasts forever, this too shall pass, whatever cliche you want to throw at it, that is the best way for me to keep myself moving forwards. But the dialogue is not always going to be positive internally, but that's a part of something like this, ultimately. And that's kind of where the lessons about yourself are learned. So I think it's important to not pretend that there is any mindset trick or hack out there that is going to allow you to be completely positive through something like this, because that ultimately is not the point. Question from Samuel_Lloyd2. How badly are you willing to get injured to finish it? Not even a consideration for me. I mean, yeah, I'd have to fall or trip or snap something or go over my ankle or something for an injury to occur. There's no real way through training volume that I'm just going to get injured. I think there's a bit of a misconception with just doing events that you're exposed to injury. Again, if you've done adequate preparation, then you shouldn't be exposed just through doing the event itself to injury. But if you fall off your bike or if you snap your ankle, that is kind of a trauma-related incident injury, which I'm obviously going to try and avoid. But I'm not really accounting for that. We'll have contingency plans that I'll kind of hand over to Johnny to manage as a plan. But yeah, plan A is to not get injured and snap anything or fall over and smash my face or anything like that. But if we do, then we'll take each case as it comes, because it would be a very long Excel spreadsheet of listing out every option off the back of every possible injury that could come. But as it stands, I've been managing any niggles very effectively throughout this training prep. I had a bit of an issue with my hip early doors, so it's just a case of managing that as we go. But what I've done is effectively build my volume towards being able to manage this without it being such a significant spike that I'm going to get beaten up or, just snap anything through high volume, which shouldn't really be the case. So, in short, not really a huge consideration for me at the moment, but yeah, I'll take it on a case-by-case basis. If I've got something that's really bothering me, I can often tell the difference between this is a niggle or this is an injury, and I'll have to assess that as and when it comes. But I'm very much planning on finishing it, and we'll do whatever is required to get there. So we shall see. Josh Brennan _99. What's the thinking behind the choice of location? Did you consider other places? No, the idea for this came from me wanting to run the West Highland Way in one go. And then I thought, you know what, that's 100 miles. You've done 100 miles before. Maybe you should go a bit bigger. And then I thought, you know what, I'm going to see what it is from the office to Ben Nevis. And it turned out to be 251k to the Ben Nevis Inn at the bottom of Ben Nevis. So I thought, you know what, really proud and excited about our new office in Edinburgh City Centre. Going to go along the canal, which has a lot of nostalgia for the YouTube channel watchers and a lot of my training over the years. And then onto the West Highland Way, which is iconic in Scotland, finishing at the most iconic mountain in Scotland, arguably the UK, given that it's the highest peak within the UK. And I thought that's a really neat way of tying all of the things that are important to me and kind of represent the adventure that comes with Scotland in one run. So it's going to be beautiful scenically. It's going to be harrowing overnight because it will be cold and miserable because we are in Scotland. And it's going to be really quite nice for me to reflect on every time I'm in and out of the office, every time I'm on the West Highland Way, every time I'm driving from the office to Fort William, which is a good 3-hour drive, which is ridiculous to say out loud. But no, I didn't really consider anywhere else, to be honest. This all started from me wanting to run the West Highland Way in one go. And that idea developed because I am a moron. Question from T_D/Pollard. Why are you only taking 3 days to train? Surely you'll need more than that. Don't really understand the question, but I'm assuming this is what a lot of people like to do, which is assume that all my training is logged on Strava. It is not. I do a lot of running without my watch currently because I kind of despise devices at this point because there's too many of them in the world. I'm tracking bigger runs and sort of recreational runs that go up on Strava, but I'm doing a lot of sort of AM, PM, just list work. But as a hybrid athlete, you can't just rely on mileage and volume as your key metric because that will affect strength work and body composition so much. So we need to be a bit more selective and creative with how we achieve the stimulus desired to be able to take this on. But you can't just exponentially increase volume and demand as race events get bigger and bigger. Great example is the guy that recently won the Spine. I can't remember his name, but he set a new record for it. His volume and mileage per week, his highest volume week, will be a lot lower than people expect because there's a certain point you just need to be aerobically fit enough and well prepared to be able to take on the beast that is the long one, because that's where your resilience and the ability to keep moving forward is going to step in, but you can't do that in training. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to recover to be able to actually take on the event itself. So just a PSA, Strava is not a sort of gospel for all of my training. It's when I have my watch on and it auto-uploads. So I assume that's what you're asking. But yeah, I get this question a lot from people saying, oh, I see you only ran 20 kilometers this week. I'm like, well, what do you mean? Oh, you're probably looking at my Strava mileage. Well, no, I do a lot of stuff outside the front door, outside the office. I just know how far it is, and I just go out and enjoy it because work's very busy at the moment. So I like to just completely disconnect from any sort of technology whatsoever. And because everything is so aerobically dominant at the moment, data isn't as important for me as perceived effort. So it's just a case of ticking things over as we go. Question from Mads_Jen. Time goal, ? Or just finish, ? So I'm starting on Friday morning on the 29th of March, and I'm hoping to finish by the time the sun goes down on Sunday, the 31st of March. Whatever time that is, I don't know. There are far too many variables at play for me to really set hard and fast time goals. The aim is for me to fight my way through it and learn some lessons about myself along the way. And there's some ballpark time goals. I think 48 hours as a sort of 2-day cutoff is a good place to look, but I need to take into account how long Ben Nevis is going to take to finish. I'm going to be absolutely hanging out by the time I get there. I'm going to stare up the 1,342 meters that is involved and think, oh my goodness, how am I going to do this? And I think best case scenario, I'll be up and down Ben Nevis in 6 hours, which for, I think it's 14 miles or 50, okay. Oh, I've confused my metric and imperial there. Basically, Ben Nevis, the time taken to cover that distance will be a lot longer relatively than it would be were it flat, especially at that point. So what I'll probably do is I'll set myself some A, B, and C sort of tiered goals for getting to the bottom of Ben Nevis, and then I'll just have to take that as it comes. I can't predict or plan too effectively. Obviously, we can plan based on a tiered system, but I can't really make an estimation as to how I'm going to feel or what it's going to look like when I get there. And at that time of the year, there could be some pretty horrendous weather conditions. There could be snow at the top. I might even need to get into crampons. So there's a lot of things to consider, which could add a lot of time. But the focus for me on this one is the journey and doing my best to bring that to life for you guys to feel like you were right there with me through the camera crew. So I haven't actually set them yet, because I've got a big training weekend this weekend, which will really help me understand those parameters. But yeah, the aim is essentially to finish, because if I can say I've covered the distance of 250k on foot, I'll be very proud of myself. Question from Toby_Emmons. Are you planning on sleeping at all? Recovery strategy during event? So I'll address the second one first. There is no recovery strategy during the event. It is continue eating, continue drinking, and continue getting sodium on board. There's not going to be any compression boots, massage gun stuff. You're kind of pissing in the ocean at that point, because the cumulative fatigue is going to be so high. There's nothing that's going to really bring me back far enough to warrant the focus, where I'd be better spending 5 minutes just eating a bit more food or getting a bit more of a psychological break than I would be lacing myself up in some compression boots or anything like that. So I am just going to make sure that I keep eating, keep drinking, and keep moving forwards. And sleep, plan A is to see if I can go the whole thing without sleeping. Plan B is to sleep a little bit at the bottom of Ben Nevis before going up it, because as I've just said, I could be pretty destroyed by that point. Plan C is to sleep for a little bit, 15 minutes or so, half an hour or so, when I really need it in the night sections. But speaking from experience, getting through a full night and seeing the sun come up is like the most powerful caffeine in the world. The feeling of rejuvenation and energy that comes from that I've experienced when I've gone a whole night without sleeping on ultra endurance events in the past is crazy. So it's around the sort of 4, 5, 6 in the morning mark where I'll really be struggling. And then as the sunlight comes up, that's where I can take a big hit of caffeine and I can really just power up, get my mana bar back full for a full day. And then being able to engage with the environment, engage with the scenery, which is a huge part of what this is all about, will be so refreshing versus the graveyard shift overnight that I'm confident that from a sleep point of view, it's getting through the night, because the aim is to just keep moving forward as quickly, not as quickly as possible, but as consistently as possible, rather, because pacing, the difference between going 6:30 per K and 7:30 per K, if you're taking long breaks, is marginal. The difference in those pacings, if you're taking short breaks and just trying to keep constantly moving forwards, will be quite significant. So what I'm trying to do is make sure that I'm only really stopping when it's needed. I'm just going to try and keep moving forwards as much as I can. Minimize breaks like I do in triathlon when I'm on the bike. I will try and not get off the bike for a full iron distance bike sort of race. And I've got quite effective at that in the past. So I'm going to take a similar attitude to this, whereby I will only stop when it is absolutely necessary. If I'm eating, I want to be walking, so I'm still moving. If I'm drinking, I want to be walking, so I'm still moving. If I'm talking to camera, I want to be walking, so I'm still moving. There might be a few sections where we just say, you know what, take half an hour here for a bit of a decompression, but we are in the process of figuring that out at this point. Question from Willem Adrian O'Donnell. Lots of A's, double A's there. How many kilometers do you run during a training week leading up to the Ultra? I'm not tracking it too much, but my biggest training week will be 120k, and that is this week. So, again, volume and mileage isn't as dominant a metric as it would be were I just training as an ultra endurance athlete, because I have strength training to consider. And what hybrid training is not is simply just abandoning the training that you normally do in place of something else. That's just seasonal training and sort of focusing on one thing and then focusing on another. I'm trying to maintain or even progress my strength whilst building up to this. So if I'm doing 150 kilometer weeks back to back to back to back, the amount of food I'm going to need to eat, the amount of fatigue that's going to accumulate, it's going to affect my strength work, it's going to affect my body composition and the years and years of work I've done to build those things. Then we need to be, as I said earlier, we need to be a bit more creative with how we get there. And for us, that's about confidence in when I can get to a point where I'm just aerobically conditioned enough to keep moving forward. If I can run for 6 hours at an aerobic pace without being destroyed at the end of it, then I'm in a good position to be able to move things forwards aggressively. If I exponentially increase my training to 8 hours to 10 hours, then all I'm doing is adding risk and fatigue that's not actually going to bring any benefit. So once I feel like I've got the aerobic conditioning required to take this on, which I'm basically hoping will occur Friday, Saturday this week. That confidence will be there. Then it's just a case of slogging through it. You can't just, as I said earlier, you can't, like the double brute was a great example. I was off the back of the Keltman, and the logical thing to do is you take the Keltman training and you double it, because it was a very similar environment, hilly, windy, horrible national park in Snowdonia versus the highlands of Torridon. So you therefore just double your weekly training. But that just doesn't work, because one, I'd be training for 40 hours a week, and two, I'd be so destroyed physically that the exponential relative growth of volume and training that would go for the double would have killed me before getting to the start line. So the key thing to do is to get yourself to a position where you're ready to take it on, but without getting to a point where you're actually doing massive, massive events in the run-up, because those are going to punch you in the face, and you then need to recover really aggressively from to keep training to move towards the actual event itself. So kilometers and volume and mileage isn't as much of a metric for me and for people that we work with this sort of thing, as exponentially building tolerance to longer and longer list sessions is. For example, we've got the wintering intake that are doing 12 hours max distance on their feet at the same weekend. We've got 75 people around the world doing that, which is really, really exciting. Some of them are planning on running the whole thing. Some of them are planning on walking the whole thing. Some of them are doing a balance of both. One person's doing it on a track. Some people are doing it in the hills. Some people are doing a backyard ultra style. But their biggest training weekend within the context of our programming, which has been very, very successful over the years to get people to balance these two things, is 4 hours Saturday and 2.5 hours Sunday. So it's basically 6.5 hours over the weekend. And if they can get through that and it doesn't absolutely put them on their arse, then they're where they need to be to reserve the putting on the arseness for the actual event itself. If you keep overspilling your MRV on a weekly basis in the pursuit of increased mileage and volume, then you're not actually going to be able to turn up to the start line rested, recovered, and with a good understanding of how to approach it, if that makes sense. Again, that wouldn't apply as specifically as I've referenced there if somebody was just training for this as an ultra endurance event in and of itself. But when you're taking into account strength training, lifting work, and other disciplines, then you need to look at things a little bit differently, which is why we'll so often say with Omnia that you can't take one training program, another training program, and just splice them together. It's often not effective to, if you're coming from a strength training background or bodybuilding background and you want to keep that up, to just get a triathlon coach, because they won't necessarily understand the interaction between the strength training and the triathlon, and those two things need to interact and work together. Otherwise, they're just going to keep bashing heads. So, yeah, anyway, I think I've made my point on those two elements there. But yeah, a question that comes up a lot, so I thought I'd be thorough on it. Joseph_Robson, how many calories do you expect to burn? Good question. I haven't thought about this, but realistically, it'll be about, I'd assume, in a 24-hour period, it'll be around 10 to 11,000. So between 18 and 25,000, inclusive of my daily TDE, I'd suggest. But we'll find out. We'll find out, because I have lots of data points, so I look forward to eating them all back. Put it that way. Question from Paddy847. What did your nutrition plan look like? I'm going to make a dad joke here. I'm going to employ a seafood diet, where if I see food, I will eat it. And that is kind of the simple approach. I will try and focus on eating what I enjoy as I go. I will try and get carbs and sodium from liquids. I will then try and make sure a lot of my food is coming from things that I can stomach quite well, which is pretty much anything at this point, to be fair. I have developed a stomach of iron during endurance events. Touch wood. I don't want to be on the side of the road regretting that statement on a podcast. But essentially, sustained carbohydrates from multiple sources, aiming for about 60 grams of carbs every hour that I am moving as a baseline, and making sure that my sodium and fluids are in line as well. I'll have a timer on my watch that will be giving me a nudge every 15 minutes to get some fluids on board, and then I'll aim to eat every 30 to 60 minutes. Maybe every 60 minutes I have a bigger bit of food. Every 30 minutes is a bit more supplemental, but my fluids will often contain carbohydrates and sodium as well. So it's a balance of keeping your stomach happy and moving things forwards, But what's good is that I'm obviously going to be moving aerobically, so my actual expenditure isn't going to be that of a half marathon per se, where I'd probably need a higher carbohydrate per hour intake to be able to sustain that sort of effort. And I can eat on the move, I can drink on the move, I'm well practiced at that. So it's a balance of practicality, flavour, enjoyment, and digestion. And a lot of those things, I'm going to be entering a bit of an unknown arena the longer into this we get. But during the double, I was nailing Krispy Kremes, pre-cooked oven pizzas because of the sodium, the carbohydrate, and just the accessibility of all those things. But I'm burning through calories, and it's basically what reduces the friction the most for me to continue to get calories on board as effectively as possible. And the answer to that will not be gels. The answer to that will not be purely fluids with carbohydrates and sodium, because my palate will be destroyed, and I'll probably want a steak bake or a yum-yum at some point. And those things I will have. Question from Joseph Braxbeer. How many turds do you expect to do? Where do you do them? And then a question from Chow_Ding. Are wet wipes the move when you got to go? So I guess that's multifaceted. In fact, there was another one as well. Question from Anza Kumar. Where do you go and take a number 2, especially if it's snowy, bad weather? Question mark. Any more fascination with this specific topic? No, that's it. So thanks for the interest, guys. Essentially, I am more than happy doing that outdoors, and we'll have a classic camping trowel and doggy bag situation so that we can alleviate that to the nearest bin. But there are stops along the way where I will have access to bathrooms, and I will try as best I can to prioritise those moments. I have never in the past found myself getting massively caught out where I've kind of been in a panic situation. I think on the 100-miler that I did in 2019, I had to go rough once, but it was early in the morning on a crisp winter's day, so there was no risk of stage fright, let's say. It was a very nice, peaceful setting. And a lot of where I'm going to be doing this is quite peaceful as well. So unless I'm caught off guard, if I am caught off guard, I will be prepared with wet wipes, bag, and everything required, which isn't that glamorous, but you know what? This is an authentic insight into how I'm approaching things. But I will try and prioritize the areas of civilization that I'll be moving through to go there. So if you've watched my most recent YouTube video, the Green Welly in Tyndrum, for example, really good stop. There's a lot of check-in points along the West Highland Way where I can jump in and out and things. We were going to have a big RV which had a toilet in it. We are downgrading that RV, and I'm not actually 100% sure whether that will have a toilet in it or not. But if it does, then we have a roaming toilet as well, which is great. But knowing myself in the past, I should be okay based on the distances between stops. But if I'm not, I will be prepared, and the shame and embarrassment that comes from doing that, I've probably overcome by sharing this with you all on this podcast today. So there we are. Question from Charlie Cameron at 19. What is the thing you are most looking forward to for this challenge? It being over. No. The self-discovery that comes with the training process and getting to the start line, first of all, and then the unknown that will come with doing my best to get to the finish line. So by that I mean the difficulty of getting the training done and working through the challenge currently is changing me as a person for the better. It's pressure testing me and forcing me to find solutions to things that I wouldn't have to find solutions to were I not training for this, which is great from a business point of view, a personal point of view, and is moving me as an individual forwards. So then, as with all events, I can be very proud that I've got to the start line. Whatever happens next is whatever happens next. I think the stories that will come from this, I think the fact that we are chucking the kitchen sink at it in terms of documentation will be great as well, because I'll have a memory that I can look back on, whatever the outcome. And the reflections that come from an event like this, whether everything goes to plan, whether everything goes completely tits up, will be what makes me better as a human being, makes me better as a husband, as a future father, potentially, as a business owner, as a podcaster, as a YouTuber, all these things. I'll be better off for it. And the only reason I get to earn the right to be better off through this thing is by taking the leap and committing to it. So I'm most looking forward to, I'm most excited about the lessons that will come from the experience as a whole. It's been very difficult the past couple of months, training balance-wise. It's a big, hairy, scary thing to prepare for. And if we go back to, I think it's Tom Pollard, and the other mileage question from Willem Andrian Onderdal, I think. I'd assume Scandinavian. It's difficult to not think, wow, I should always be doing more, because that's not feasible. I am not a full-time athlete. I need to fit my training in out with working hours, and that is very, very demanding, which means that weekends are kind of gone. Sundays I try and protect as a day, but Saturdays are very much working days, running in the morning and then back in the office most of the Saturday afternoon and early evening for me as well. And that's not something that I'm loving, but needs must. I've committed to this. It's my own choice. Nobody's making me do it. So going through that process is very, very valuable for me, because it's forcing us to learn things and change things on the move. And then the more profound reflections that can come from the back end are very exciting as well. Question from Tommy Reed, coach: how do you deal with the emotion of suddenly being very slow, quote unquote, sub 5 mile to 250 kilometers? But the emotion is positive. Within October, November, December, January, February, March. Yeah, within a 6-month period, I should be able to run a sub 5 minute mile and 250 kilometers at over 200 pounds body weight. So the emotion of that will be very positive. I think there is such an emphasis on performance metrics and going fast in the running Twitter sphere at the moment that I think again, I might be misreading this, but essentially the emotion I'm guessing that you're implying is negative, whereas for me that's very much not the case. It's a pride thing, whereby if I can do that within a 6-month period, I don't think there's many people that would be stupid enough to attempt either end of the spectrum that much, especially whilst balancing the strength stuff too. So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing some pacier stuff over the summer, but I've very much enjoyed the longer, slower stuff over the winter. Very, very different demands. And by exposing myself to both of them, I am learning different lessons from different ends of the training spectrum, which is ultimately why I love training like this and why I encourage other people to do so. So yeah, that's that essentially. The emotion is very positive if I can do that. And I can still run reasonably quickly relative to body weight, and relatively considering for myself. There might be 14-minute 5Ks watching it. Oh my God, bloody slow, mate. Fine, probably relative to you, definitely relative to you, in fact, but you're probably a bit slower relative to the world record. So it's all a scale, my friends. I'm going down a letsrun.com thread rabbit hole here. I'll dive out of this one, but yeah, that's that. The emotion would all be positive. So how do I deal with it? With pride, hopefully, but I haven't done it yet, so that's the key detail. Question from Tommy Reed, coach again. What's the longest training run you'll get in the leg? So Friday, today is Wednesday. And Christ, on Friday, oh no. Friday and Saturday, I'm doing 50k on concrete on the Friday. I'm doing 50k on trails on the Saturday, and that'll be it. That'll be my biggest training weekend. And it should, in theory, leave me feeling not destroyed on Sunday. So the hope is that I can get through both these things confidently. It will give me the confidence that I need to get through it. And then it's just a case of cracking on and seeing it through. I have another big run planned after that that'll be around the 60k mark, but the biggest volume week is this week. No, it's another 50k. It's not 60k. So yeah, 50k is as high as it's going to get for me from this point onwards. I did a few longer runs towards the end of 2023, but that was kind of just me getting to feel with my aerobic capacity and whether I just had the ability to keep on going, which it turned out I did. So yeah, Friday, Saturday this week will be the office along the canal 50k, and then Saturday will be the bottom of the West Highland Way for 50k, and that's a bit of a recce as well for the camera team and Johnny from a support crew point of view. Alex Bishop Adventure, what's a current training week look like for you? So Mondays I don't train because I'm generally in the office for about 15 hours. It's kind of the way the week needs to work with the cadence of everything, because obviously there's a high output of stuff that kind of resets week to week from a social content point of view, from a programming point of view with Omnio, from a communications point of view. So I've just learned over the years to prioritize that as a work day. I'm normally in the office for 6 and I'm normally leaving at about 9 p.m, which is actually not that great for me at the moment. I feel pretty emotionally drained at the end of those days, but it means I've just started my training week from Tuesdays, which is off a lower body and an easy run, not one that I track on my Garmin. I just get out and sort of go with the perceived effort. Wednesday will be upper body and easy run. Thursday will be a sort of Metcon-y accumulating fatigue style session that we're taking from the wintering group, and that will have some sprints or some assault bike or some rowing work in it as well. Friday will be full body stuff and maybe some assistance cardiovascular stuff, and then Saturday will be my long run, which is kind of anywhere from 4 to 6 hours at the moment, 3 to 6 hours at the moment. Kind of the baseline it'll be is about 3. And then Sunday is rest that I protect for psychological reset. And you might be thinking, wow, that's not a huge amount of volume, but that's all that I can manage sustainably at the moment around the work demands, personal demands, and everything going on. So I can't create time out of thin air. And I think it's important to reference that I am making these things work out with managing the team within working hours, because that's the only way the businesses can operate. I can't just fuck off at midday on a Tuesday and run for 4 hours. That doesn't work. So I need to make these things work within the constraints of those hours. And yeah, I think this Friday, Saturday is going to be important for me to just really have that final confidence that we've made it work with less volume than ostensibly people might expect for something of this scale. But the experience I've got in dealing with the demand and the unknown, once you're just purely relying on your ability to keep going, I'm confident will be what allows me to see this through. And for context, looking back to 2019 for my 100 miler, which I did in 22 hours and 15 minutes, which is my first 100 miler, pleased with that as a time, about 2,000 meters of elevation, 2,500 meters of elevation from memory. My longest training weekend for that was a 30k Friday night, 36k Saturday night as a weekend. So that is probably less volume than somebody might expect training for a 100 miler, but I got through the 100 miler in 22 hours and 15 minutes at over 200 pounds body weight. So essentially, we know what works for me, we know what works for others when it comes to balancing things along strength, and that those are the principles that we're using. But confidence building is key, which is why I'm really looking forward to hopefully building some confidence on Friday and Saturday this week. Question from Joseph Guntrip. Any specific training for running at night or just relying on past experience? Bit of both. There's nothing planned in, and the main thing to consider is the double, whereby I've gone through that in that sense in the past, and I know what that feels like, and that's where I really entered the unknown. I say again, the nighttime is tough, and I would ideally like to do my Friday, Saturday 50k overnight, but practically speaking, with the support crew, with the work demands at the moment and everything we've got in the run-up to game day, it can't happen. So I think for the most part, I'm actually just going to rely on the past. I'm going to do one of my last 4-hour runs, which is going to be on March the 15th, the Friday, I think. I'm going to do that overnight, and that'll be just a bit of exposure to that. But it's kind of just the peacefulness, the focus and the demand that I need to get used to. You can't really train that effectively for sleep deprivation. It's just a case of riding with the waves, and I will have some power naps up my sleeve as and when required, along with being very selective and careful with caffeine, but also knowing what comes on the back end of getting through that graveyard shift and seeing the sun come up, because that's very, very powerful. So no hyper-specific training. There's a few things that, had time been a little bit more on our side with current workflow and everything, that we would have worked in, would have been this weekend, but that just can't happen from a practical point of view. So yeah, I think actually, to answer your question, I have one run that's going to be night focused before game day. Other than that, I'm backing my past experiences. So I'm going to call that there. I feel that's quite a comprehensive overview of everything that we're working to. So I will say thank you very much for listening. And if you do have any further questions, please do drop me a DM, or I might even record a YouTube video on exactly this in the next couple of weeks. So I hope you've enjoyed that. There's some insights for you. And it seems that you're all very fascinated with bathroom activities, but I don't blame you, because the practicality is concerning. So thank you very much for listening, and I will see you next time.